Love, I've come to understand, is not a fortress. We tell ourselves it is, that we've built a life with high walls and a sturdy foundation, impenetrable to the sieges of the outside world. But a marriage is not a structure of stone and mortar. It's a delicate, living ecosystem, a biosphere of two, and it can be poisoned by 1,000 tiny, almost imperceptible changes in the atmosphere. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks forming, the subtle shifts in the air pressure. But love, or perhaps just the comfortable, narcotic hum of routine, has a way of blinding you. It makes you believe the illusion of stability is the same as stability itself. Emily and I were supposed to be partners. That was the prospectus, the mission statement we had drafted in the early, intoxicating days of our relationship. Two people, a single, unified entity, working toward a common goal. We were building a life. That was the dream, anyway. The reality, as it turned out, was much, much messier. Our relationship began like a spark in a dry field, fast, consuming, and impossible to ignore. Emily was a force of nature, a whirlwind of charisma and impulsive energy. She could light up a room with the sheer wattage of her personality, making everyone in her orbit feel, for a moment, like they were the center of her universe. I, a man who finds comfort in the clean, predictable lines of a spreadsheet, who believes in the quiet power of deliberate, analytical thought, was drawn to her chaos. I fell hard, not just for her beauty, but for the vibrant, technicolor way she experienced the world. For years, it worked. We were a study in complementary opposition. I admired her drive, her ferocious ambition, her alchemical ability to turn any situation into a golden opportunity. And she, in turn, seemed to support my own entrepreneurial dreams, even when they were long shots, even when the numbers on my spreadsheets refused to cooperate. We were a team. But then, my business, the one I had poured my life savings and a decade of my soul into, began to falter. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse. It was a slow, grinding erosion. Deals that had once come easily began to dry up. Key partnerships dissolved. The economic downturn, a distant abstraction on the news, became a brutal, intimate reality. I poured everything I had left into trying to salvage the company. My time, my energy, my sanity. At first, Emily was my rock. She'd offer words of encouragement, a steadying hand on my shoulder, a reminder that success wasn't always a linear progression. But as the months of struggle bled into a year, and then two, her patience began to fray. The ecosystem of our marriage was being starved of the resources it needed to thrive, my attention, my energy, my success. And it was beginning to show. The words of encouragement became fewer, replaced by subtle, sharp-edged jabs disguised as jokes. "When are you finally going to catch a break, David?" She'd ask, her tone light, but with an undertone of something that sounded a lot like disappointment. I told myself she didn't mean it, that it was her way of motivating me. But deep down, I knew better. Her own career, in stark contrast to mine, was a rocket ship. As a high-end event planner, she had built a formidable reputation. She could transform a sterile corporate ballroom into a starlit wonderland, a simple garden party into an unforgettable, immersive experience. Her clientele was a who's who of the city's elite, corporate executives, tech billionaires, aging socialites. Her calendar was a dizzying mosaic of high-profile events. She was in her element, a conductor orchestrating symphonies of success. And I was proud of her, truly. But her ascendancy only served to cast my own failures in a harsher, more unforgiving light. At least, in her eyes. Our evenings, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and easy laughter, became strained, tense affairs. She'd come home late, buzzing with the residual energy of a successful event, her face flushed with accomplishment. I, meanwhile, would be at the kitchen table, a man marooned on an island of spreadsheets and unanswered emails, trying to plug the leaks in my sinking ship. "Long day," I'd ask, a desperate bid for a connection. "You have no idea," she'd reply, pouring herself a glass of expensive wine, the sigh of a weary but triumphant warrior. And then, inevitably, would come the casual, deadly little comments. "You know, Charlotte suggested we try that new fusion restaurant downtown. Maybe we could go next weekend, if you can pull yourself away from all this." Charlotte Starr. The name had become a constant, unwelcome presence in our lives. her best friend, and the self-appointed queen bee of her social circle. Charlotte was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly wealthy, influential, and unapologetically, surgically cruel. She didn't bother to hide her disdain for me, cloaking it in a thin, transparent veil of polite concern when Emily was around. "You're so lucky Emily is so understanding, David," she'd say at dinner parties, her smile a weapon of perfectly whitened teeth. "Most women wouldn't be so patient with a project." I'd laugh it off, the good-natured, self-deprecating husband. But her words were tiny, poisoned darts, and they always hit their mark. And Emily? Emily never defended me. Not outright. She'd just offer a tight, uncomfortable smile and change the subject, an act of passive betrayal that was, in its own way, more painful than Charlotte's open hostility. The turning point, the moment I knew the foundations of our fortress were truly crumbling, came late one night. We were lying in bed, the space between us feeling more like a vast, cold canyon than a few inches of mattress. She turned to me, her face a pale, unreadable mask in the moonlight. "Do you ever feel like we're not aligned anymore?" The question was a quiet, devastating bomb. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said with a sigh. "It's like we're living two separate lives. You're always here, buried in your work, and I'm always somewhere else." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that I was trying, that everything I was doing, every ounce of energy I was expending, was for us. But the words wouldn't come, because she was right. We were drifting apart, two ships passing in the night, our signal lights growing fainter with each passing day. "I'll do better," I said finally, the promise feeling hollow and inadequate even as it left my lips. She didn't respond. She just turned over, her back to me, and switched off the light. That was the moment I realized our marriage wasn't just in trouble. It was dying. Not from a single, fatal blow, but from 1,000 tiny, unaddressed wounds. And yet, I still believed. I still hoped we could find our way back. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't possibly have known then, was that Emily had already started charting a new course, one that would lead us to a night I will never forget. A night that would change everything. Emily's friends were a tribe, and I was not a member. They were a flock of beautiful, brightly plumed birds, and I was a dull, gray pigeon who had inexplicably wandered into their gilded cage. They weren't bad people, not in the way that bank robbers or serial killers are bad people, but they were a product of their environment, a world where status was the only currency that mattered, and appearances were the only reality to be trusted. Their lives revolved around designer labels, exclusive invitations, and a specific, coded language of thinly veiled insults disguised as compliments. And at the center of this glittering, toxic solar system was Charlotte. Charlotte was not just Emily's best friend. She was her high priestess, her oracle, her queen. She held court, dictating the ever-shifting dynamics of their group with an iron will sheathed in a velvet glove. She had a rare, terrifying talent for making everyone around her feel simultaneously cherished and utterly inadequate. She loved Emily, in her own possessive, controlling way. But she loved power more. I tolerated Charlotte for Emily's sake. It's one of the unspoken clauses in the marriage contract. You don't have to like your spouse's friends, but you have to endure them. But over the years, it became brutally, painfully clear that Charlotte's feelings for me were not just a passive dislike. It was an active, strategic campaign of disapproval. I was an obstacle to her complete and utter influence over Emily. I wasn't rich enough, successful enough, or alpha enough for her taste, and she didn't bother to hide it. The first time I met her, she was hosting a dinner party at her sprawling, sterile mansion in the suburbs. Emily had insisted I come, framing it as a networking opportunity. I walked into that party feeling like an anthropologist studying a strange and hostile culture. I was surrounded by men who measured their worth in stock options and women who measured theirs in carats. Charlotte greeted us at the door, a dazzling, predatory smile on her face. "Emily, darling, you look absolutely stunning, as always." Her eyes then flickered to me, a swift, dismissive appraisal. "And this must be David, is it?" She said my name as if it were a foreign, slightly unpleasant word she was trying out for the first time. "That's right," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for having us." She didn't reply. She just gave me a final, dismissive once-over before turning her full, radiant attention back to Emily. "Come, darling. Let me introduce you to everyone who matters. From that moment on, I knew my place in Charlotte's world. A footnote in Emily's story, a slightly embarrassing accessory she was forced to tolerate. Over time, Charlotte's influence over Emily grew, a slow, creeping ivy that began to choke the life out of our relationship. It wasn't obvious at first, just small shifts in Emily's vocabulary, in the things she prioritized. But as my business struggles became more pronounced, so did Charlotte's open disdain for me. "I just don't know how you do it, Emily," she'd say during one of our excruciating group dinners, her voice dripping with a false, syrupy sympathy. "Balancing your incredible career while also having to support someone else's dreams. It must be utterly exhausting." Emily would offer a weak, non-committal laugh, but she would never defend me. And her silence was a roaring, deafening indictment. Her other friends were no better. They were a chorus of judgment, a Greek tragedy of passive aggression. There was Lauren, who loved to talk about her husband's latest promotion, her anecdotes always concluding with a pointed, pitying glance in my direction. And there was Vanessa, who had a gift for turning any conversation into a subtle critique of my life choices. I tried to talk to Emily about it once, after a particularly grating dinner party. "Do you ever notice how they talk about me?" I asked as we drove home. She glanced at me, her brow furrowed in a pantomime of confusion. "What do you mean? They make these little comments, these digs about my work, my plans. It's like they're waiting for me to fail." She sighed, a long, weary sound, and turned her gaze back to the road. "David, you're being too sensitive. They don't mean anything by it. That's just how they are." "Am I?" I countered, "because it feels pretty damn deliberate to me." She didn't answer. The rest of the drive was a tomb of silence. As the months wore on, I felt Emily slipping away from me, pulled into their orbit. She spent more and more time with them, their brunches and weekend getaways becoming sacred, inviolable appointments. She'd come home from these excursions buzzing with their energy, full of their stories and their laughter, and there would be a new, visible distance in her eyes when she looked at me. And then, their opinions began to come out of her mouth. "Charlotte says you should really consider consulting," she said one evening, as we were cooking dinner. "She thinks it would be more stable for you." "For us." I froze, the knife in my hand hovering over a half-chopped onion. Charlotte thinks. I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "She's just trying to help, David," Emily replied, completely oblivious to the rage and humiliation that was coursing through me. "She just wants to see us succeed." But it didn't feel like help. It felt like judgment. It felt like my wife was no longer my partner, but a proxy for her friends' disapproval. The more time she spent with them, the more I felt like an outsider in my own life. I wasn't just fighting to save my business anymore. I was fighting to hold on to the version of Emily who had once believed in me, who had seen me as her equal. But with every brunch, every dinner party, and every piece of secondhand advice from Charlotte, that version of her felt further and further away. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself we would find our way back once my business turned around. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel the atmospheric pressure dropping, a storm gathering on the horizon. And I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that when it finally hit, it wouldn't just blow over. It would change everything. The invitation to Emily's latest dinner party arrived not as a piece of stationery, but as a royal decree. She had been planning this event for weeks, a general preparing for a major military campaign. Every detail was a strategic decision, from the carefully curated guest list to the meticulously planned menu. The flowers, the lighting, the playlist. All were chosen with her usual obsessive, perfectionistic energy. It was to be the event of the season, she claimed. For me, it was just another night in the trenches, another evening of enduring veiled insults and forced smiles, another performance of the happy, supportive husband. But this time, it felt different. The stakes felt higher. This wasn't just about showing off her hosting skills. It was about her showcasing her world, a world where I felt increasingly like an undocumented alien. "David, you will be there, won't you?" she asked one evening, her tone casual but her eyes holding a sharp, non-negotiable glint. "Do I have a choice?" I replied, my attempt at a joke landing with a dull thud. She smiled, a quick, brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you do. But it would mean a lot to me. People notice when you're not around. People stare. by which she meant Charlotte and her coven, the women who lived to dissect every aspect of our lives as if we were characters in a particularly juicy television drama they were hate-watching. "I'll be there," I said, forcing a smile of my own. "Wouldn't want to disappoint your adoring fans." She laughed, a sound as artificial as the silk flowers on our mantelpiece, and went back to her seating chart. The night of the party arrived, and our house was transformed. It no longer felt like our home. It felt like a film set. Soft, moody lighting. Elegant, minimalist floral arrangements. The faint, pretentious hum of some obscure Icelandic composer. It screamed a kind of effortless, expensive perfection. Emily was in her element. She flitted around the room, a radiant, confident butterfly, greeting her guests, ensuring everything was just so. And as I watched her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in this version of her life. I felt like a stagehand who had accidentally wandered into the middle of a scene. I lingered near the edge of the room, nursing a glass of wine, trying to make myself as small as possible. I spotted Charlotte almost immediately. She was scanning the room like a hawk, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing. When her gaze landed on me, she smiled, a slow, predatory smile that felt less like a greeting and more like a challenge. She glided over to me, a shark moving through water. "David," she said, her voice a purr of condescension. "How wonderful to see you. How's the little business venture coming along?" The pause, the deliberate hesitation, was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "It's still going," I replied, my tone as even and unrevealing as a concrete wall. "Good for you," she said, her voice dripping with a false, cloying sincerity. "It's so important to stay optimistic, isn't it?" Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't get me thrown out of my own house, Emily appeared at her side, beaming. "Charlotte, isn't this just perfect?" David even helped with the setup. Charlotte raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression one of profound unimpressment. How supportive of him. I clenched my jaw and forced a smile. This was not the time or the place. As the evening wore on, the conversation, as it always did in this circle, inevitably turned to work, to success, to the relentless, competitive sport of life. One of Emily's friends, a tech investor named Martin with an ego the size of a small moon, asked me about my business. It was a simple question, but in this room, it felt like an interrogation. I could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on me, the collective attention of the room shifting in my direction. "It's been a challenging year," I admitted, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. "But we're making progress." "Challenging," Charlotte repeated, savoring the word as if it were a fine, vintage wine. "That's one way to put it." A ripple of low, polite laughter went through the group. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. It was enough to light a slow, burning fire in my chest. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out and never look back. But I didn't. I stayed. I bit my tongue. I reminded myself that losing control was exactly what they wanted. And then, Emily spoke. "Well, David has always been resilient," she said, smiling at me, a bright, practiced, public smile. "Even when things don't go exactly as planned." It was meant to sound supportive, I think. But to my ears, it sounded like another jab, another public acknowledgement of my failures, another reminder that I was the project, the charity case. By the time the party began to wind down, I was on a knife's edge. I had spent the entire evening dodging subtle insults and fake smiles, and my reserves of patience were completely depleted. As I stood by the kitchen counter, refilling my glass with water, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. It was Charlotte, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper to one of the other women. "I just don't know how she does it," she was saying. "Living with someone so uninspiring. It must be draining." I didn't hear Emily's response. I didn't need to. The soft, complicit laughter that followed told me everything I needed to know. I remained quiet for the rest of the night, a silent, vibrating statue of rage. But my mind was racing. This wasn't just about a party anymore. This was about everything. It was about how Emily had allowed her friends to write the narrative of our marriage. It was about how she had stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as a problem to be managed. And for the first time, I realized that my silence wasn't strength. It was complicity. It was enabling her. It was time to change the script. And soon, everyone in that room was going to see just how wrong they had been about me. The night had taken on the surreal, hyper-focused quality of a bad dream. Every sound, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the brittle, artificial laughter, seemed amplified, distorted. My glass of wine sat untouched, a prop in my hand. I wasn't drinking. I needed to be sharp. I could feel the evening building toward a climax, a moment of ritual humiliation, with me as the designated sacrifice. I could almost hear the punchline before it was delivered. And then it came. Emily had gathered everyone in the living room for a final round of drinks. The conversation, steered with expert precision by Charlotte, had once again circled back to careers, to ambition, to the great, glittering scoreboard of life. Martin, the tech investor, was holding court, recounting his latest triumph. "Of course," he said, his gaze flicking to me with a look of theatrical pity. "It's all about resilience, isn't it, David? I hear that's what you've been working on lately." The room erupted in a wave of soft, polite, utterly devastating laughter. It wasn't a roar of mockery. It was the quiet, confident chuckle of a pack of hyenas who have successfully isolated their prey. I clenched my jaw, a familiar, futile gesture. Emily, my wife, my partner, chimed in, her voice bright and casual, as if she were delivering a witty one-liner at a comedy club. "Oh, David's definitely resilient," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I mean, he has to be, considering how unpredictable his ventures can be." Her words landed like a slap. She wasn't defending me. She was twisting the knife. I looked around the room, at the sea of amused, condescending faces. Charlotte was leaning back in her armchair, a small, satisfied smirk on her lips. She was the director, and this was her masterpiece. And then, as if to deliver the killing blow, she spoke. "Well, Emily, I suppose it's good that you have something to balance out all of your success," she said, her tone dripping with a poisonous, faux sweetness. "Every star needs a supporting player, after all." The room exploded, not with polite chuckles this time, but with genuine, unrestrained laughter. And that was it. That was the moment the dam broke. That was the moment the quiet, accommodating, resilient David died. I set my glass down on the coffee table with a soft, deliberate click. The laughter, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, began to falter, then died completely. The room went silent. Every eye was on me. I didn't rush. I took my time. I pushed myself to my feet and met each of their gazes, one by one, before finally letting my eyes settle on Emily. "Balance," I said, my voice dangerously calm, dangerously steady. "That's an interesting choice of words, Charlotte, because from where I'm standing, this doesn't feel very balanced at all." Emily's smile evaporated. Charlotte's smirk froze. I continued, my voice gaining strength, addressing the room at large. "I've sat here tonight, and at countless other nights just like this one, and I've listened to all of you. I've listened to your stories of success, your carefully curated highlight reels. And I've noticed something. None of you are nearly as interesting, or as successful, or as happy as you pretend to be." The silence was now a tangible, suffocating thing. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lauren, the real estate agent with a penchant for embellishment, suddenly found the pattern on the rug to be utterly fascinating. "You see, I've learned something over these past few challenging years," I said, my gaze shifting back to Emily, pinning her in place. "Failure isn't just about losing. It's about learning. It's about growing. It's about stripping away the bullshit and finding out what you're really made of. And while I've been doing that, some of you," my eyes swept the room, "have been so busy polishing your facades and tearing other people down that you haven't even noticed the cracks forming in your own foundations." Charlotte opened her mouth to interrupt, to deliver some sharp, witty retort, but I cut her off. "Take you, for example, Charlotte," I said, my tone as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. "You love to position yourself as the arbiter of everyone else's relationships. But how many times have you been divorced now? Is it 3? Or are we on 4? I lose track. And yet, you're the expert." The color drained from her face. I turned back to Emily. "And you?" I said, my voice softening just enough to make the words cut even deeper. "I have supported you through everything. Your career, your dreams, your endless, desperate need for validation. I never once asked for anything in return. But tonight, you have shown me exactly where I stand in your life. And it's not beside you. It's beneath you." Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock, of genuine hurt, finally breaking through her practiced composure. But I wasn't finished. I have let you and your friends treat me like I am less than, like I am a failure. But the truth is, I have been more of a partner to you in my quiet, uninspiring struggle than you have ever been to me in your glittering, hollow success. And that, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, changes. Now, I picked up my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. The room was frozen, a tableau of stunned, uncomfortable silence. I think I've said enough for one night, I said, turning toward the door. Enjoy the rest of your perfect party. And with that, I walked out, leaving them all to sit in the wreckage I had created. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I felt free. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew, with an absolute, unshakable certainty, that I was never, ever going to be their supporting player again. The click of the front door shutting behind me was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It was a sound of finality, of liberation. I walked out into the cool, indifferent night air, leaving the suffocating, perfumed atmosphere of Emily's party behind. My heart was pounding, a frantic, adrenalized drumbeat against my ribs, but it wasn't from fear or nerves. It was from the electrifying, terrifying thrill of having finally, after years of quiet complicity, spoken my truth. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was done. Done playing the part they had written for me. Done being the silent, accommodating straight man to their cruel, endless comedy routine. But as I got into my car, the initial rush of victory began to recede, replaced by the cold, clear-eyed realization that this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new, and likely very ugly, war. I drove aimlessly, the city lights a blur of neon and gold. My mind was a high-speed replay of the last hour, dissecting every word, every reaction. Emily's shocked, wounded face. Charlotte's frozen, slack-jawed disbelief. The uncomfortable, shifting eyes of their friends. Emily's laughter, the sound that had once been my favorite music, now echoed in my head, sharp and cutting. How had it come to this? How had the woman who had once been my fiercest champion become my most public critic? And how, I asked myself with a fresh, painful wave of self-recrimination, had I let it happen? I ended up at the waterfront, parked by the dark, churning expanse of the river. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full, unadulterated force of my own emotions. The anger, white-hot and cleansing. The profound, bottomless sadness for the marriage I thought we had. The disappointment in her, and in myself. And underneath it all, a new, unfamiliar, but powerful emotion. A simmering, unshakable determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about reclaiming my life from the narrative they had tried to impose on it. The next morning, I woke up on the lumpy, unfamiliar sofa at my best friend Liam's apartment. I had called him from the waterfront, my voice raspy and strange even to my own ears. He hadn't asked for details. He'd just said, "Come over." That was Liam, a man of quiet, unwavering loyalty. "So," he said, handing me a mug of black coffee, his expression a mixture of concern and something that looked a lot like pride. "Are you going to tell me what finally happened? Or do I have to guess?" I sighed, the events of the night before feeling like a scene from a movie I had watched, not one I had lived. Emily and her friends happened. Again. "Let me guess," he said, leaning against the counter. Charlotte was leading the charge. "Of course," I replied. But Emily was right there with her. It was like a tag team humiliation. Liam's jaw tightened. "And you just took it?" A small, grim smile touched my lips. "No, not this time." I told him everything. How I had stood up, how I had called them out on their hypocrisy, their cruelty, their empty, perfect lives. Liam listened intently, his expression shifting from anger to a slow, dawning respect. "Good," he said when I had finished. "It's about damn time you reminded them who you are, David." I spent the next few days at Liam's, a self-imposed exile. I needed the space, the silence, to think. Emily called, texted, a barrage of frantic, emotional messages that I ignored. I wasn't ready to talk. Not until I knew what I wanted to say. Instead, I focused on myself. I went for long, punishing runs along the river, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement a kind of meditation, drowning out the noise in my head. I pulled out an old, dusty notebook and began sketching out ideas for a new business, a new venture, something bold and ambitious and entirely my own. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of the old me, the man who had dared to dream, who had believed in his own abilities. On the fourth day, Emily showed up at Liam's, unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking smaller, more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "David," she said, her voice soft. "Can we please talk?" I hesitated, torn, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy and awkward. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice breaking. "For what, exactly, Emily?" I asked, my own voice calm, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for days. "For what you said, or for the fact that I finally called you on it?" "For everything," she said, looking down at her hands. I realized, after you left, that I was wrong. About you. About us. About everything. And I'm scared of losing you." Her words, the words I had longed to hear for years, hit me harder than I expected. But I didn't let my guard down. "Emily," I said, my tone gentle but firm, "it's going to take a lot more than an apology to fix this." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I didn't know if I believed her, but for the first time, it felt like she was actually seeing me, not the version of me she and her friends had created. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. That night, as I lay in the dark, I thought about what came next. The path forward was a fog, but one thing was clear. I was not going back to the man I had been. I had found my voice, and I was never, ever going to let anyone, not Emily, not Charlotte, not anyone, silence it again. The fallout from the party was not a single, contained explosion. It was a series of aftershocks that continued to ripple through our social circle, shaking the very foundations of our life. Emily's friends, a group accustomed to a world of carefully managed appearances, did not react well to the raw, unscripted truth I had thrown at their feet. The phone call started almost immediately. Not to me, of course. To Emily. And with each call, I could feel the pressure on her mounting. "Charlotte says I embarrassed her," Emily blurted out one evening, during our first, tentative attempt at a real conversation since the party. Her tone was defensive, but beneath it, I could hear a new, unfamiliar note of fear. "You embarrassed her?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "Is that really what this is about, Emily? Protecting Charlotte's feelings?" She crossed her arms, pacing the small living room of Liam's apartment. "You made a scene, David. You walked out and left me to deal with a room full of people staring at me. Do you have any idea how that made me look?" "Frankly, Emily, I don't care how it made you look," I said, my voice dangerously even. "I care about how you made me feel. Do you have any idea how it felt to be mocked, to be belittled by my own wife in front of a room full of her sycophantic friends?" Her face softened, but she didn't apologize. "Not yet." "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, a familiar, defensive refrain. "They didn't mean anything by it. It's just how they are." "No, Emily," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's how you let them be. And I am done putting up with it." That conversation set the tone for the weeks that followed. Her friends began to take sides, and the line was drawn in the sand, with Charlotte as the self-appointed general of the opposing army. "David has always been so sensitive," I overheard her say during a phone call with Emily, her voice a poisonous whisper. "He just can't handle strong, successful women." Strong, successful women star. That was her narrative. She was the champion of female empowerment, and I was the weak, insecure man trying to hold her brilliant friend back. It was a masterful piece of spin, and Emily, caught in the middle, didn't know which way to turn. Not everyone, however, fell in line. Liam was my rock, my unwavering ally. "Charlotte's toxic, man," he said bluntly one evening. "She's a classic narcissist. She thrives on creating drama and making other people feel small. And Emily has been letting her get away with it for years." "I know," I said, staring into my glass of whiskey. "But what am I supposed to do? I can't force her to see it." "No," he agreed. "But you can decide what you're willing to tolerate. And right now, it sounds like you're tolerating way too much." His words struck a chord, and then a crack appeared in their united front. Lauren, one of Emily's friends who had always been a loyal lieutenant in Charlotte's army, reached out to me. Her voice on the phone was hesitant, almost apologetic. I just wanted to say, I think Charlotte went too far the other night, she said. I didn't realize that must have been really uncomfortable for you. I appreciated the gesture, but it didn't change the fundamental reality of the situation. The damage was done. As the weeks passed, the tension between Emily and me became an unbearable, constant presence. She tried to pretend everything was fine, throwing herself into her work, but I could see the strain. Her effortless charm seemed forced, her laughter hollow. One evening, after another strained, silent dinner, she finally broke. "David, are we even trying anymore?" she asked, her voice tinged with a desperation that was new to her. I put my fork down and met her gaze. "Are you?" I countered. She looked taken aback. "Of course I am. But it feels like you've already given up on me." "I haven't given up on you, Emily," I said, my voice softer now. "But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. You let your friends disrespect me. You joined in. And now, you seem more concerned with their opinions than with fixing what's broken between us." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. And in her silence, I saw a flicker of the truth finally breaking through. That night, I slept in the guest room. I needed the distance to think. I didn't know where we were headed. But one thing was clear. I was no longer willing to let anyone, not Emily, not Charlotte, not anyone, dictate my worth. I was done playing the silent, supportive husband. I was just getting started rewriting my own story. The fallout from the party hadn't just shaken my marriage. It had shaken me to my core, forcing me to reevaluate the very foundations of my life. The weeks that followed were a quiet, cold war. Emily and I coexisted in the same house, but we were living on different continents, separated by a vast, silent ocean of resentment and misunderstanding. Charlotte, true to form, continued her campaign of psychological warfare. She positioned herself as Emily's loyal defender, the only one who truly understood her. I could feel her influence in every stilted conversation I had with my wife, in every defensive posture Emily took. "David is clearly going through something," she'd say at their brunches, her voice dripping with a false, pitying concern. The reports would trickle back to me through the few mutual friends who hadn't chosen a side. Poor Emily. She deserves so much better than a man who can't handle her success. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to isolate me, to paint me as the villain, the unreasonable, emotional man who had lashed out. And for a while, it felt like it was working. One evening, I tried to break through the wall of silence between Emily and me. "So, is this how it's going to be?" I asked, as we sat across from each other at the dining room table. "We're just going to pretend none of this is happening." She looked up, her expression guarded. "I don't know what you want from me, David. I want you to see it, Emily," I said, my frustration finally boiling over. "I want you to see what she's doing. She's manipulating you. She's poisoning our marriage." "Charlotte is my best friend," she retorted, her voice rising. "She's just looking out for me." "No, she's looking out for herself. She can't stand to see you happy with anyone but her." The argument went nowhere, a familiar, frustrating circle of accusation and denial. The turning point came, as it so often did, from Liam. "You know what your problem is?" he said one night, as we sat at a local bar. "Enlighten me," I replied dryly. "You've spent years letting them walk all over you," he said. "And now that you've finally stood up for yourself, they don't know how to handle it. But you're still waiting for Emily to catch up. Maybe it's time to stop waiting. Focus on yourself. Show them all what you're really made of." His words were a splash of cold water to the face. He was right. I had been waiting for Emily to change, to see the light. It was time for me to change myself. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Charlotte or Emily's silence define me. I was going to take control of my own narrative. I threw myself into my work with a renewed, almost ferocious energy. I reached out to old contacts, dusted off old business plans, and started exploring new opportunities. I started hitting the gym, not just to burn off frustration, but to feel my own strength, both physical and mental. And slowly, things began to shift. I started to feel like myself again. Confident, capable, focused. Emily noticed. I could see it in the way she watched me, a new, uncertain expression in her eyes. One evening, as I was getting dressed for an industry networking event, an event I would have avoided a few months ago, she stopped me at the door. "David," she said, her voice hesitant. You seem different lately. I paused, turning to face her. Maybe that's because I'm finally putting myself first. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I've got to go, I said, stepping out the door. Don't wait up. That night, as I worked the room, not as Emily's husband, but as David, the entrepreneur, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't living in her shadow anymore. I wasn't letting her friends' opinions dictate my self-worth. I was reclaiming my life, one conversation, one handshake, one confident smile at a time. I didn't know what the future held for my marriage. But one thing was certain. I was no longer the man who had walked out of that party weeks ago. I was stronger, sharper, and ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant leaving Emily and her toxic, glittering world behind for good. The changes in my life were not a subtle recalibration. They were a seismic shift. I could feel the ground solidifying under my feet, my confidence building, my focus sharpening. I was reconnecting with a version of myself I had almost forgotten, a man who was not defined by his wife's success or his friends' opinions. And as I began to thrive, the tension with Emily deepened into a new, more complicated dynamic. She was watching me, her expression a mixture of confusion, resentment, and a flicker of something that looked a lot like respect. It wasn't long before she confronted me. I was getting ready for another networking event, knotting my tie in the mirror, when she appeared in the doorway. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. "Talk about what?" I asked, not turning from my reflection. "Us," she said. "I feel like you've been distant." A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Distant? Emily, I've been trying to reach you for years. It's only now, when I start to focus on myself, that you suddenly notice I'm here." She flinched, but she didn't back down. "That's not fair. You walked out on me. You humiliated me in front of everyone." "And what about how you humiliated me?" I countered, finally turning to face her, my voice calm but firm. "You laughed at me, Emily. You let your friends tear me down, and you joined in. Do you have any idea how that felt?" Her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I thought she might finally, truly, apologize. But instead, she shook her head. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I got caught up in the moment." "The moment," I repeated, shaking my head. "That's your excuse for months of disrespect?" The conversation ended there, another stalemate. I left for the event feeling a familiar mixture of anger and a new, liberating sense of relief. Angry that she still didn't get it, but relieved that her excuses no longer had the power to wound me. Meanwhile, Charlotte had not given up her campaign. Word of my renewed confidence, my new business ventures, had reached her, and she was determined to undermine me. Mutual friends reported back on her latest narrative. My success was a desperate, temporary fluke, a sad attempt to prove my manhood. "She's threatened," Liam said, when I vented to him about it. "She doesn't like that you're not playing her game anymore. And she definitely doesn't like the idea that Emily might finally be waking up to her influence." It was a perspective I hadn't considered, but it made a chilling kind of sense. Charlotte thrived on control, and I had become an uncontrollable variable. And Emily, it seemed, was starting to see Charlotte in a new light. During one of their lunches, Charlotte had made a particularly snide remark about my new business. "David's really acting like he has something to prove, isn't he?" she'd said. "It's almost desperate." But instead of laughing along, as she would have in the past, Emily had pushed back. "He's working hard, Charlotte. And honestly, I admire that." It was a small act of rebellion, but it was a significant one. For the first time in years, Emily was questioning her queen. A week later, she approached me again. This time, her energy was different. She was nervous, vulnerable. "David," she began, sitting across from me at the dining table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About everything. And I realize I haven't been fair to you." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Go on." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Charlotte, she's not a good influence. I see that now. I let her opinion, her world, shape how I saw you, how I treated you. And that wasn't right. You didn't deserve that." Her words, a direct and unequivocal confession, caught me completely off guard. For the first time, it felt like she was truly owning her actions. But I wasn't ready to let my guard down. "So what does that mean for us?" I asked. "I want to fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try." If you are. Her plea hung in the air between us. And for the first time in weeks, a flicker of genuine hope ignited within me. But I knew better than to make any promises. Trust, once pulverized, cannot be rebuilt overnight. We'll see. I said finally, my tone cautious but not unkind. Actions speak louder than words, Emily. If you really want to fix this, then show me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't the absolution she had hoped for, but it was all I could offer. For now, that would have to be enough. The days following Emily's confession were like learning to walk again after a long, debilitating injury. There was a new, tentative quality to our interactions. She was trying, I could see that. Her words were softer, her actions more deliberate. She began to create distance between herself and Charlotte, declining invitations to their group brunches, a move that I knew was the equivalent of social secession. But the scars from months, years, of emotional neglect and public humiliation didn't just vanish. I continued to move forward on my own path. I had learned the hard way not to make her the sun in my solar system. My focus remained on myself, my goals, the future I was building. But her efforts were a constant, quiet presence, impossible to ignore. One evening, she surprised me by cooking dinner. It was a gesture so out of character for the new Emily that I was momentarily stunned. The table was set with candles. She had made my favorite meal, a simple steak and roasted vegetables. What's the occasion? I asked as I sat down. She gave me a small, shy smile. No occasion. I just wanted to do something for you. We ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but tentative, like two diplomats from warring nations meeting for the first time on neutral ground. After dinner, as we sat on the couch, she finally spoke what was on her mind. David, I know I can't undo what I did, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I want you to know that I am serious about making this right. I met her gaze, searching for any sign of her old, performative self. I found none. Why now, Emily? What really changed? She sighed, looking down at her hands. I think I let their world, Charlotte's world, become my reality. I was so caught up in their approval, their validation, that I lost sight of what really mattered. When you walked out of that party, it was like a bucket of ice water. I realized, in that moment, that I was about to lose the only person who had ever truly seen me, the real me, and loved me anyway. Her words were genuine. I could feel that. But it wasn't enough to erase the past. You didn't just lose sight, Emily. You hurt me. Publicly. Repeatedly. And now you expect me to just forget that? No, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. I don't expect that. I want a chance. A chance to prove that I can be the woman you fell in love with again. Her vulnerability was disarming. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the old Emily, the one who had been my partner, my champion. But was that woman still there, or was this just a ghost? While she worked to repair our relationship, I continued to build my own life. My new business venture, which had started as a flicker of an idea in a dusty notebook, was now a roaring success. I secured a massive new client, a deal that put my firm on the map and my name in industry publications. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of my own professional worth. And I wasn't going to let anyone, including a newly apologetic Emily, diminish that. The real test came during a dinner party we attended together. It wasn't one of Charlotte's. Emily had severed those ties completely. It was a small, intimate gathering hosted by old, mutual friends. I was hesitant to go, but Emily insisted it would be different. And it was. For the first time, I saw her truly stand with me, as my partner. When someone made a passing, innocent comment about my past business struggles, Emily didn't laugh or brush it off. She spoke up. David worked harder than anyone I know to get through that, she said, her voice clear and proud. And look at where he is now. He built something incredible from the ground up. It was a small moment, but it was everything. Later that night, as we drove home, she reached over and took my hand. I'm so proud of you, David, she said softly. I don't think I've said that nearly enough. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't respond right away. I just gave her hand a small, gentle squeeze. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was an acknowledgement. I saw her effort. And for now, that was enough. The finality of it all came to me one quiet evening, as I sat alone in my home office, going over the plans for my company's expansion. It wasn't the anger or the betrayal that lingered anymore. It was the clarity. For months, I had been lost in a storm, questioning everything. But now, I realized I was no longer the man who stood silently in the corner while the world mocked him. I had grown. I had found my voice. I had found my strength. Emily's efforts to repair our marriage were real. She had stepped away from her toxic friends. She had invested in therapy. She was trying to rebuild. But as much as I could appreciate her growth, I knew, deep down, that something had shifted irrevocably within me. The man I was now was not the same man she had married, and I wasn't sure he could go back. One evening, she asked the question I had been both dreading and expecting. "David," she said softly, "do you think we'll ever be the same again?" I looked at her, at the genuine, painful vulnerability in her eyes, and I took a deep breath. "No," I said, the word both honest and kind. "I don't think we will. But that's not necessarily a bad thing." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I just want to know if there's still a chance. For us." I paused, considering my words with a new, careful deliberation. "Emily, I think there's always a chance for something new to be built. But it's going to take a very long time. And even then, it won't look like what we had before. I can't make promises I don't know if I can keep." She nodded again, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand. I want you to know, I'm not giving up." In the weeks that followed, I continued to rebuild my life. My business flourished. I reconnected with the parts of myself I had lost. And one evening, at a small business seminar, I met someone. Her name was Claire. She was smart, grounded, and refreshingly, unapologetically real. Our conversation was easy, effortless. There was no pressure, no performance. Just a mutual respect and a spark of genuine curiosity. As I walked home that night, I realized I wasn't looking for a replacement for Emily. I was simply open to the possibility of something different, something healthier, something new. Looking back on it all, I could see how far I had come. The man who had once been the butt of the joke was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned to stand tall. Emily had played a role in that transformation, a painful but necessary catalyst. But her chapter in my story was closing. As I stood in the quiet of my home, a small, genuine smile touched my lips. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to embrace it, on my own terms.